I think the first thing Paul points out that we need if we're going to be effective in sharing our faith is we need a compelling motivation. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 11 gives us a couple of motives, actually. Therefore, since we know the fear of the Lord, we try to persuade people. What we are is plain to God. I hope it is also plain to your conscience. Paul says the first reason that we share our faith is because it is our identity. We try to persuade people, this is who we are. Who we are is plain to God. It's plain to you. Is being a disciple who makes disciples just something you do, an optional assignment, or is it the way that you see yourself? Is it your identity? In verse 20, actually, later on, the Apostle Paul says, we are ambassadors for Christ. How do you see yourself primarily? Makes a big difference. We're going to talk about this more next week. Second motivation that Paul gives us, though, is the love of Christ. Verse 14, for the love of Christ compels us, since we have reached this conclusion, that one died for all, therefore all died. What motivates us? Everybody is dead without Christ. We're all starving to death and doomed without Jesus. But Jesus died for us, and we have the good news. This is what we call owning lostness. We're compelled that people are lost. Verse 11, the Apostle Paul has already said in chapter 5, verse 11, we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each may be repaid for what is done in the body, whether good or evil. Since we know the fear of the Lord, we try to persuade people. Now, the fear of the Lord is not the terror of God. It is an appropriate respect for God and godly things. Wayne Barclay says it is not the fear of the dog that is cowering, awaiting a whipping. It's that reverence that keeps even a thoughtless man from doing things that would break the heart of somebody he loves. Knowing the fear of the Lord means we know that people are going to stand before the judgment seat of Christ one day, either prepared or unprepared. And we have the good news to prepare them. You know what I think keeps most Christians from sharing Jesus? I don't think most Christians are convinced of lostness, the seriousness of being lost. I have friends, missionary friends, who say, before you get people saved, you got to get them lost. Before people know they need salvation, they first of all need to know they need salvation, that they are lost. And I'm convinced that most Christians really do want to obey God, and we are kind of motivated, but we're just not that convinced of lostness, or at least not convinced enough to make it move us beyond our safety. Paul says the love of Christ compels us. We've got spiritual food, and people are starving. Loved ones are starving. We've got to share it. And so the love of Christ compels us. We live in a world surrounded by people, hundreds of thousands, millions of people in this area who are drowning without Christ. And you have the words that'll bring them life. Watching that clip reminds me of our friend Vince Antonucci. Vince was our first full-time staff person here at New Life. I've actually been in touch with Vince recently. I think he's gonna come in and preach for us sometime this year. He's a hoot. You will love him. But Vince grew up in a family that never went to church. He grew up an atheist. So he's in college, an atheist, studying to go into politics, political science and philosophy he's studying. When he sees some Christian guy on television say something he thinks is stupid, and Vince realizes, I've read philosophy, I've studied world religion, I've never read the Bible. I'm going to read the Bible so I can laugh at Christians. So Vince went out and had to buy a Bible on his own. He read the Bible fully expecting it to read like some tall tale, reading about Paul Bunyan and Baby's Blue Ox or something. But as he read it, he realized this doesn't read like fable. This is about real people in real times and real places that can really be verified or denied or proven to be untrue. And the more he studied the Bible, the more he realized it was true, and he gave his life to Christ. He gave his life to Christ without ever talking to a Christian. And so Vince was going into politics because he believed that's where the action is. But then he decides, I'm going to go into ministry because that's where the action is. And then he decides, I'm going to be a church planter. I'm going to be one who starts churches because that's the most effective way to reach people like I was. And Vince will stand in front of Christians. He'll come in front of Christian groups like this and he'll say, I'm in ministry today because I am angry at you. Maybe you won't like him. No, you will. He'll say, because I'm angry at you. He says, because you never shared the Bible with me. He said, I don't know how many Christians I knew in my life, but not one cared enough to ask me a question spiritually. Not one cared for me enough to invite me to church. I even had to buy my own Bible to come to Christ. And so Vince says, I'm in ministry now because I don't want there to be more people like me. I want to start churches where people care about lost people. I think about that Titanic scene when I think about Vince. You see, for God so loved the world that Jesus came back for us. Do you have a sense of urgency? Because you really understand people are lost.